Welcome to Syncreate, a show where we explore the intersections between creativity, psychology, and spirituality. We believe everyone has the capacity to create, and our goal is to demystify the process and expand the boundaries of what it means to be creative. So we talk with visionaries and change makers and everyday creatives working in a wide array of fields and mediums, from arts to science to technology and business. And our aim is to illuminate the creative process from imagination to innovation and everything in between. I'm Melinda Rothouse, and I help individuals and organizations bring their dreams and visions to life. And at Syncreate, we're here to support your creative endeavors. So if you have an idea for a project or a new venture and you're not quite sure how to get it off the ground, reach out to us at syncreate.org. Our book, also called Syncreate, walks you through the creative process from start to finish so you can take action on your creative goals. We also have resources, tips, and coaching to help you bring your creative work to the world. So I am so excited today to have my new-ish but growing friendship, Reena Friedman Watts. She's also a podcaster. She's the host and creator of the Better Call Daddy podcast, as well as a podcast producer and coach. And she got her start chasing stories for the Jerry Springer Show way back in the day. Definitely have some questions about that. And, we connected a few months back through the World Podcast Network through Bruce Chamoff, and he suggested that we should know each other and collaborate. And so we did, and I'm so excited to have you on the show today. So welcome, Reena.
Thank you so much for having me. I see why you are at the top of the charts. That was a fantastic intro. Wow.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm always tweaking, that's the creative process, right? But yeah, love that. So, we were talking yesterday about your show, and you've done so much with your show. You started in 2020, right? With that show,
Yes,
and you've
I
already
did.
done hundreds of episodes, which is amazing. And so, I feel like so much of what you do with your show and in general is about storytelling, right? And so I'm curious, how do you know a good story when you hear it? And how do you bring out other people's stories?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what makes a great story is people that are willing to be unedited.
Yeah, right.
They've worked through their stuff and they are willing to have a very vulnerable conversation.
Yes. That is so important. Yeah.
Yeah. Those were the best guests. I learned that actually at the Jerry Springer Show.
Uh-huh.
Those were the best guests. The ones that were just like, I don't care what people think. I am going to tell it like it is. Read the whole book to find out.
Yeah. And back in the day, it's like kind of a reputation for okay, well, we're gonna see what we find out here, right? On the show, right? But it's great. I agree. It's great when people are kind of open and willing to share and not sort of hesitant, what are people going to think? Or because we all have amazing stories to share, whether we realize it or not. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I cannot tell you how many people have been like, I wish that I had a crazy enough story to be on your show. And I'm like, if you've lived life, you have something.
Exactly. And you may think oh, this is just a mundane thing, or everybody goes through this or whatever. But, life is full of mysteries and surprises and all kinds of things.
I think too, it's about finding common ground.
Yes.
There is some trauma bonding aspect.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
What's your biggest struggle? What's your biggest struggle? Oh,
Yeah.
there's a little bit of something in there for both of us, right?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, and we were talking about this actually in a recent episode that will be released actually this week. I did an episode with Jennifer Selig, and she's a kind of a Jungian psychologist, and we were talking about the underworld journey, and basically how the personal is the universal, and she teaches like memoir writing, and so it's like how do we connect our personal story to that universal common theme that anybody will be able to resonate with.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you actually,
Yeah.
like, I know that you're into, spiritual people and that you studied religion and that you love talking about creativity and music and all these things, but I was curious, like, have you had any difficult conversations or have you talked to people you don't agree with or have you stretched those boundaries at all? I'm interested in your stretches.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I mean, I've definitely had moments, where I'm talking to people and I'm like, hmm. And I think, again, as you just said, it's about finding common ground. I haven't necessarily gotten into like arguments with people because I think I have more of a tendency to want to say like, okay, well, where can we intersect? Like, where can we find our commonality? So, but I mean, good point. I haven't necessarily sought out, people that I think are going to be like super controversial or, because what I'm trying to get to with the show is, of course, demystifying the creative process, but also like understanding people's internal workings, right? Like, how does creativity show up for you? Or what does that look like in your field and in your medium? And kind of bringing out, because it's not the same for everyone, right? I mean, we think sometimes we have this misconception like either you're creative or you're not, but we are all creative and we express that and experience it in different ways. So I think, at least so far, you're making me think like, maybe I do need to branch out a little bit. Like, what does that look like for any given person across like many different contexts?
Right. So for me, I interviewed a former KKK member that was
Ah,
converting to Judaism. Could I have interviewed him when he was spewing the hate? Probably not, but since he was,
right.
like, kind of in the reform stage, we were able to
Yeah.
have a very uncomfortable conversation. I mean,
Yeah.
I even wanted to know, like, what he said to Jewish people, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'll have to check that one out. What was that like for you?
Honestly, even in the beginning, hearing his voice was triggering,
Mm.
but then once I kinda got past that, I really wanted to know, like, how did he get involved in that? And
Yeah.
who he really was and could love change hate.
Such an important question in this day and
Yeah.
age, right? Yeah. And what did you discover?
I think that people that get involved in those kind of groups are hurting themselves.
Mhm. Yeah.
From what I've discovered,
Yeah.
the reason people get into gangs, the reason people hurt other people or mean for no reason is they've had a difficult upbringing.
Sure. Sure. I mean, I've come to believe through my studies in psychology that, the root of almost all of our problems and our challenges is trauma,
Yeah.
you know? And so many of us experience that in different forms, in different ways, right? Obviously, some more extreme than others. But yeah.
Yeah, also, I was interested I heard you say in this episode with Whitney and Jenkins that
Mhm.
your dad is Jewish and your mom is Christian, and
Mhm.
I know you've explored a lot of Buddhism and meditation and centering and all this mindful work.
Yes.
Have you ever explored Judaism at all?
I have. And so, like a good story that I'll share, I taught religious studies for a number of years at the college level, both at Tulane University in New Orleans and then here in Austin at Austin Community College. And one of the things that I did was I took students out to different religious events and like encouraged them to go explore on their own, particularly traditions outside of their kind of home tradition or what they grew up with. And so, we went, I mean, growing up, right? So we were like more secular, but we would go to some high holidays or, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, things like that. And so it was culturally present, like went to some seders for family members, things like that. And I was always like, really interested and curious about like what is all the symbolism of the Seder and like what is this all about, and definitely felt that more, I guess, cultural connection. um but I was actually raised like just more secular, and I'm kind of grateful for that actually, because I think it just like I didn't like come into life with a particular like religious angle or bias necessarily. But definitely, went to visit synagogues and, hung out with rabbis with my students and sometimes on my own, as well as religious leaders from other faiths. And one of the things I really love to do here in Austin, I did a series of panel discussions at Austin Community College where I brought together religious leaders from different traditions and like let's talk about a given topic like religion and conflict, or like what are our differences, what are our similarities. And it's so fascinating. But one thing that I've really found is that religious leaders, by and large, I mean, I'm not saying this across the board, but tend to have this more ecumenical view where they're like, let's all have dialogue, like, let's get along, let's try to understand each other, let's try to find the commonalities rather than being antagonistic to each other. Of course, that's not always the case, but yeah.
I would like to attend a panel like that. I mean, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was drawn to the study of religion. I kind of came into it more from like, being interested in music and performance and ritual and things like that. But I came to realize that religion is such a fascinating window into people's daily lives and their belief systems and their why and how they organize their lives and how they think about death. I know you just recently did an episode with a hospice chaplain and cantor who wrote a musical about end of life, right? Like the big questions, like, why are we here? What's it all for? And how do different traditions and cultures like try to answer those questions?
Oh, I find all of that to be so fascinating, and I feel like I really started asking those kinds of questions a little bit before I got married, but definitely when I hit my 40s.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that's really common, kind of as we like get more toward midlife, we start going like, okay, well, what is this all about? Why am I here?
I do feel like I've had God moments within my creativity. Have you?
Tell me more about that.
Yeah,
Yes.
even when I worked at Jerry Springer,
Yeah.
there was a lady who was one of the security guards for the green rooms, and she was very church going, and every time I saw her, I'm like, pray for me," and that I would have a good show.
Yeah.
And I swear every time that chick prayed for me, I don't know, but I felt like her prayers were magical, like, I don't know. When she wasn't there, I was like, "Oh, no, who's gonna pray for me?"
Right.
But I started thinking about God at that time, and before that, to me, God wasn't so real. It was like, "Okay, if there's a God, I'll make this basket."
Yeah.
I was, like, constantly testing God. I wasn't
Yeah.
really buying into the whole formal prayer thing. Like, I felt like
Mhm.
synagogue was kind of like a fashion show or, like, more like community of, like, where you hang out with people that are like you.
Right, exactly. Well, and I think community is a super important part of spirituality. right? For sure. But yeah, one thing that's coming to mind is, my mom was in the hospital some years ago with a pretty serious infection, and we weren't sure if she was going to make it. And I was, just like letting people know what was going on and like, please, like, send your thoughts, your good wishes, your prayers, whatever that language is for you. I mean, I was pretty active in a Buddhist meditation community at the time, like, keep her in your practice. And she miraculously pulled through. And for me, that was a big one because, like, she didn't have any brain activity.
Oh my God.
And she ended up, like, waking up. So I think there really is, like, we can talk about it in different ways from like physics to spirituality, but like everything is energy, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so if we're putting our positive energy and our intentions out there on behalf of someone else, like, I think, that's going to be felt in some way.
That is a remarkable story. It's funny because my mom too actually, went through breast cancer, and I
Mhm.
had just signed up for this trip abroad. It was like a spiritual singles trip.
Yeah,
It was like
awesome.
18 to 35, and I got, like, I think a scholarship to go or something, and I was living in LA at the time, and my mom was like, "Go, my sister's a nurse, and she's coming here to take care of me," and so I ended up going on the trip, and then the day of her surgery, I, like, rounded up the people that were in my group, and I was like, "Can everybody, like, say a prayer for my mom?"
Mhm.
And I felt really spiritually connected to that. And
Yes.
after the trip, I ended up going and being with my mom for a couple months, and she went through, like, rehab and reconstruction and stuff, and I ended up meeting my husband, I kid you not, like, right after that,
You're kidding, but not through
and
the
I
trip?
felt like that was
Yeah,
spiritually connected.
definitely. Definitely. Well, and that's so interesting in different ways because, like, you went on this singles trip, so you had the intention out there, but sounds like you actually met him in a different context, but the timing, so
Oh, yeah, there's
interesting.
been so many timing things where I feel God too, like, I mean, we met on a internet dating site, and I wasn't a paying member, and he was a paying member, and he wouldn't have been able to message me unless we were on at the same time,
Oh,
and it was funny too
wow.
because I had this cousin who lived on Venice Beach, and he used to invite people over for Passover, people just from the beach and, Jews from all walks of life, from the Kabbalah Center, all of these
Mhm.
interesting people. I actually loved it. It was the most interesting Passover I've ever been to, and, my mom gave me his phone number when I moved to LA. He was, like, my only relative there. She's like, "Oh, you have a cousin in LA." And, at his table, the one thing he said at his Passover table was, "What do you wanna be free from?" I
Yes.
love that
It's
question,
such a good
and
question.
at his table, I said I wanted to be free from JDate, like, from the internet dating site that I had been using to
Yes.
try to
Yes.
find someone, and I ended up meeting him on that site that same year,
That's
and,
amazing, and
yeah,
then you were free of it.
I was free of it.
I love that. I love that, and I love that question about, like, how do we each experience that connection between, creativity and spirituality. So, you mentioned kind of the God moment in the Jerry Springer show with the guard and the prayers, but how else has that shown up for you, like in your own creative work?
Yeah, thank you. Even recently, I went to this local meetup. It's called Cup of Joey here in Houston because 'cause we're new to town, and I like to meet other creatives and entrepreneurs,
Mhm.
and I went up to this guy, and you lead with your why, like, what gets you up in the morning, what
Mhm.
lights you up. I love that actually, not like,
Yeah,
what do you do?
it's a great one.
And, I said I love to interview inspirational dads or daddy's girls or anybody with a little daddy drama story, and he said, "My brother is an inspirational dad, and he started a nonprofit because his son has a rare form of muscular dystrophy."
Oh, wow.
And he offered to, like, sponsor me getting a studio and interview his brother, and it was the most moving story, and it was like one of those things where, that's what I love to do. I love to get into
Mhm.
the studio, I love to connect with people, I love to get people's stories. I sat down with this guy for an hour and a half before we recorded. I did a 2-hour interview. I enjoyed editing the thing, and after I interviewed him, that story literally moved me to tears.
Wow.
And
That's
it felt
amazing.
spiritual, the whole thing, and how it came together and how we moved quickly to make it happen. He came to my
Yeah.
first meetup that I ended up putting on after. I've gotten him on other shows now. He wants to continue to work with me. And it was just, I feel like that's a thing too. When these opportunities come to you, when God presents you with these opportunities, it either entertain them immediately because they're gifts,
Mhm.
like jump on them, don't hesitate, or
Mhm.
leave room for other opportunities to keep presenting themselves. Like,
Yes.
if something's presented and you're like, "I don't know," listen to that gut, let it go, make room for something else. But if there's something that you're like, "Yeah, I wanna do something with that person," then freaking go for it and don't overthink it.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I think that's so true. So that kind of brings me to your podcast, right? Better Call Daddy, which is a very successful and well known show. And the premise is you talk to different people about their stories, and then you have your dad weigh in at the end. And the one I just listened to, the one about the musical that we were talking about, I was just really struck by, your father's kind of wisdom and how he sort of like summed everything up and just gave this really thoughtful advice. So, like, how did you get the idea for that premise, like to structure your show that way?
Honestly, I wanted to interview, like, shock and awe type of stories,
Yeah.
like Jerry Springer slash
Yeah.
Howard Stern, because I used to
Yeah.
book those kinds of guests.
Uh huh.
But then I was like, after I got some of those kinds of guests on the show, I feel like what was resonating more with my audience was everyday people that
Yeah.
had never told their story. And I kind of mix it up with celebrities
Mm
still. Like,
hmm.
I did interview Judge Alex because I worked on that show for 5
Mm
seasons. I did
hmm.
interview one of the nannies from Nanny 911, but I do try to tie it back to the daddy angle. And yeah, the dad piece was kind of like Jerry Springer's final thought at the end. It was like, you can
Mm
interview anyone and then he can have a lesson at the end. And for me too, something that was important was on the Jerry Springer show, like, there's never a happy ending.
hmm.
On our
Right.
show, I kind of wanted there to be that.
Yes. Like to end on a positive note, right? Like no
Yes.
matter how crazy things get, there's a possibility that we can, like the way I see it, we can make meaning of our experiences, of our suffering, of our trauma. And if we can make meaning from it, as Viktor Frankl said, right, then we can learn and grow from it.
I
So,
love that you just brought up Viktor Frankl because we went to Austin recently, and that
yeah.
was the one book in our Airbnb, so I reread A Man's
Oh,
Search for Meaning.
oh, yeah. Yeah. So powerful. Yeah.
In some ways, I swear to God, I feel like I'm a reincarnation of someone that has gone through the Holocaust. Like, I am constantly, even though, my parents didn't go through it, my grandparents didn't go through it. I'm very lucky. I've known a lot of my great-grandparents. Um, the Holocaust, I am and just the world today, like, all of these wars that are happening, I feel those things on such a deep level, and a part of my show too, I wanna be able to have conversations in a real, honest, raw way with people I might not agree with, so I can learn from that, and
Yeah.
even my dad can learn from that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things, like back to those panel discussions that, I had a professor in grad school who ended up going to Chicago, and he does like interfaith dialogue between like Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And I mean, I think that those conversations are so very important. And that was what I was kind of trying to do on a smaller level as well, with other faith leaders as well, not just those three traditions. But it's like, how can we come to the table and try to like understand each other?
Do you
rather
feel
than.
like coming from an interfaith background has played into your creativity? Have you tried to weave that in at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I was raised in a pretty secular context. So, but I think maybe just the fact that my parents were not of the same religion maybe like opened me up to different possibilities, just in a way as like people who are like multiracial, multicultural, whatever, like they talk about like kind of this living in two worlds or speaking multiple languages, like you're literally thinking in different languages. And I think it just, yeah, it opens up maybe space for possibilities in a way that, and I'm speculating here because it's not my experience, but if you're raised with one single tradition or one single way of being, often that's just how it is, right? Like that's what you know. And then people, I think, maybe end up getting a little older and then they start to question that. And then they have this like crisis of faith. And do they end up like recommitting to their kind of home tradition? Do they go seeking for other kinds of wisdom? Do they like sort of become cynical about religion and spirituality altogether? But I think, at least for me in my own experience, it just, I always kind of had the sense of, well, there's multiple ways. There's not just one way to be in the world.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a healthy response. Did you ever feel like you didn't fit into either?
Yeah, I mean, I always felt like kind of on the outside of all of it. Like I would go to different churches with friends growing up and like see what that was like. And, obviously you go to synagogue now and then and I don't know. I was a very voracious reader as a kid. So I remember at a pretty young age reading books like um Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse and, getting interested in like the Tao Te Ching and, different kind of Eastern traditions. And so I think I was just really curious. I think it's curiosity, about like, well, how do other people live? How do other people exist in the world? You know? And I think there's wisdom in a lot of different places. And I really respect that.
Also, you kind of like mentioned with your mom, like when she
Mhm.
was having a hard time, that
Yeah.
brought you to religion.
Mhm.
I heard in your episode with Whitney Ann, you talk about you were going through a breakup
Mhm.
and for the first time in your life, you experienced panic attacks.
Mhm.
Did you then turn to God or spirituality in that time again?
Well, talk about like synchronicity. Um what happened with that is I was already feeling like I had done some meditation here and there, like, just like guided meditations or this and that. And I had known people who were, Buddhists in various stages of my life. But when I went through that breakup, it's like, I think, crisis often leads us to spirituality, right? Because we're looking for the deep answers, right? Not obvious. Right. Like when we're just rolling along in life and everything's great, we don't necessarily like, we're not asking the bigger questions. But all of a sudden, when there's a big crisis, then so I had moved to Austin from New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and that was a huge shakeup. And I was just kind of starting my new life in Austin, which I literally had to like, I felt like my life was taken upside down and shaken. Right. And I had to I had to reinvent myself from scratch, basically. And so I was in a relationship when I moved here. And when that relationship ended, I had already been starting to feel this kind of yearning toward a more spiritual path. And I was like exploring different things and reading different books. But when that breakup happened, I was in New Orleans. I was back in New Orleans, actually, and I was in a bookstore in uptown New Orleans, and I was just wandering around, and this book, like, sort of jumped off the shelf. It was, like, one of the staff picks, and it was Pema Chodron's book, When Things Fall Apart. Do you know that book?
No, I
It's
need
a
to read that.
You do. It's a game changer. And it's actually I'd say it's the one book that has brought so many people to meditation, because she talks about her own personal crisis. And actually it was a divorce, that got her, like, really onto the path. And it's so relatable. Right. And so it was just like the right thing at the right time. And I had also been reading, like, The Power of Now, and some books like that, more spirituality focused. And so I came back to Austin, and there was a meditation center that was, like, down the street from where I lived when I first came to Austin. And I had always been thinking, like, oh, I should go check that out. I want to go see what that's about. And I never had set foot in the door. And so I came back, as I was going through this breakup, came back to Austin, was reading Pema Chodron's book, and I was like, I'm going in there. And I went, and I, like, walked in the door and received meditation instruction, and then, like, signed up for a class, and that was it. It was like I was on yeah, I was on the path from there, like, really, truly.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love meditation. I need it more in my life.
I know, right? Yeah.
But yeah, also, I feel like I was doing a lot of that after a breakup. I think I did yoga, like kung fu yoga, for about a year and a half before I met my husband, because I was in a previous relationship, and when that ended, it's funny because we went from working with each other at Jerry Springer to moving to LA together.
Oh, wow.
And then when we moved to LA, I was like, "Oh."
Hmm. Sometimes
Uh,
changing context can, like, be really eye-opening in a relationship, right? That's happened to me before.
definitely.
Yeah.
And so we ended up breaking up, and then after that ended, because we were together for about 3 years, it was a big soul-searching period for me of kind of like how I got into that situation.
Yes.
I needed to choose some healthier habits. I quit smoking. I took a job that I loved. I actually decided to take a job third shift. I am such a night person. I took
Wow.
a post-production supervisor role on Danny 911, and we worked opposite schedules, and then that helped with the breakup.
Yeah. Right.
And yeah, then I did yoga for about a year and a half and took a break from having sex and got super clear on, like, what I wanted in a relationship, and met my husband shortly after that.
That's amazing. I love that story. And I think it's, like, a fairly common one. It's like, again, when we go through some sort of crisis, whether it's the end of a relationship or losing a job or, being displaced or losing a loved one, whatever these things are, it's like that's when we start to kind of go, like, inward and, like, okay, what's going on? Are there some changes I need to make? Like, how do I really want to move forward from here? That soul searching.
I'm curious too, like, do you ever call your parents for direction? Like, I literally call my dad through all of that. I'm like, "Oh, I'm at this place again. I'm in a transition. I don't know what I wanna do. Help."
Yeah. Yeah, I do for sure. And my dad, I have a similar kind of relationship, I think, with my dad. And he's great because he's a little deadpan. He's got, like, kind of a dry sense of humor, but he has this joke whenever I tell him, like, about, a friend or somebody that's going through something. He's like, well, they never called me for advice, you know? So whenever I call for advice, I'm like, okay, sit down. Are you ready? Because, like, when I was younger, he was just like, who are you? And I don't even know you. And he didn't know me either. We've come to, like, closer and closer as I've gotten older, you know? But whenever I actually ask for advice, he's just, like, thrilled.
That's cute.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think he's the most proud of you about? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so kind of like I just alluded to, when I was younger, like, there's a lot of ways that my father and I are different. ways that were similar as well. But, he's always been optimistic, which I appreciate, no matter how like difficult or dark things get, he retains a sense of optimism. Um, but, I chose a very different path than he did. He's a retired physician. He grew up in a good Jewish family, and you got two choices, kid. You can be a doctor or a lawyer, right? And I was
Totally.
like more inclined toward this creative path. And, he definitely encouraged me to like, well, get a practical degree, just in case, just as a backup. And, and I kind of did do that actually, but I've always pursued music. I'm a musician, and I do a lot of different creative work. And I think when I was younger, when I was still finding my way and stumbling around, as we all do, right, in kind of our 20s and early 30s, he would just be like making me, well, you should go get a job doing, like this. And I was just like, that was the last thing that I would ever do, right? Like, seriously? Like, really? But as I've gotten older, I've followed a really non-traditional path, and it's worked out for me, right? Like, I love my life. I do all these different creative things. I'm a published author, I'm a musician, podcaster, professor, I do coaching and consulting. Like, I've figured it out, and it's not like a linear path. It's not one of those things where it's like you do A, B, C, D, and you just do the thing. I've had to kind of figure it out and invent it on my own. And I've had a lot of dead ends and moments of like confusion and, having to reinvent myself. But I've gotten to a really good place. And I think he sees that and recognizes that and really respects that. So I think I think every parent worries about their kid, and they just want their kid to be happy and have a good life, right? And so of course you're going to worry, but once you realize like, oh, okay, I've established myself, like I'm good, I can take care of myself, like things are okay, then he's like, okay. But like the sort of twist that happened a few years ago, which is really fun, is that he became the leader of an organization. Like he was on the board, and then he actually became like the board president. And he was asking me for advice, like, "Can you help me with my resume?" And then like I do leadership work, and so we would have these really amazing conversations about leadership and like what it means to be a good leader. And he really appreciated it. It's like I had something I could share with him, and he was like a great leader. He accomplished so much in the context of this organization. So it was like we were able to find a relationship that was almost more like peers in a way. I mean, of course, he's still my dad. He's always going to be my dad. But it was like a real development, I would say, of our relationship.
I absolutely love that. I love that the tables turned a little bit and that he
Yeah.
needed some advice from you. That's so cool. It's interesting when that happens, kind of like midlife.
Mhm.
Are there any other like creative projects you guys have done together?
Yeah, well, so my dad's a woodworker in his retirement. And, he's
Ooh.
always had a creative side, but he didn't, and he's always had like a wood shop and stuff like that, but he's really gotten into it since he retired. He turns bowls, he makes furniture. And so, I've gone in the shop with him and like worked on turning bowls together and things like that, like picking out the wood and like figuring out how are we going to shape it. And I love that kind of stuff. And also I've commissioned some pieces from him, like some jewelry boxes or just some other kinds of like boxes to keep like letters and cards in. And, my place, I have tons of his bowls and his furniture in my place. So it's really lovely to have like something in my space that reminds me of him that he actually created.
Okay, so I really love that. And it's funny because my dad ran a manufacturing company with his parents for 40 plus years, and they used to make like lighting reflectors.
Uh-huh.
And when we had a house in Chicago, I really wanted to take some of those lighting reflectors and put them in our home. And now that kind of like
Oh,
makes me want to do that, like, because we're looking
yeah.
to buy a home here in Texas now.
Yeah.
I think that would be really cool in my studio to have some of my dad's like canned lighting.
That would be so cool and so unique.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he used to make different colored ones too, and
Yeah,
he
I
was even
love
thinking of,
that.
like, turning some of them into, like, pots for plants, like,
Yeah. I love
that
that
could be cool.
so much. Yeah, you definitely should do it. Yeah. Cool. So I kind of wanted to ask you also, and we were kind of talking about this on the phone the other day, like, do you see yourself as a creative? I think you do, right? I mean, do you see yourself as a creative person?
I think honestly through this podcast, I've accepted it.
Yes. And what does it mean to you to be a creative person? Like what does that mean to like sort of embrace that label? And I ask because I think a lot of people say like, "Oh, well, I'm not creative." And I believe we're all creative. So but like I how is it empowering or how does it shift things when you actually like take that on like, "Yes, I am a creative person."
There's lots of aspects to it for me, to be honest. Like, the other night, there was another podcaster who had come to my first podcaster meetup, and she was putting on her first one, and I kinda wanted to see, like, what did she take from the one that I
Yeah.
put on?
Yeah.
And how did she do things in her own creative way? And I need that energy of like other people that are doing things that I also love to do. So if I find
Yes.
out that somebody's a musician, like Bruce Chamoff, who you mentioned in the intro, I was like, hey, if you ever need somebody to sing a backup hook, like I love to sing. And he was like, here's the lyrics. I'm not going to tell you what key to sing in. Give it a go.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and that I think that's so important because I love collaborating with other people. Like, solo creation is great and, there's a time and place for that, but for me, really get that sense of like synergy from collaborating with others and it sounds like you feel that too.
100%. That goes with the title of your show. It's funny, me and my dad were literally just talking about that today, how, you can accomplish a lot of things on your own
Yeah.
and you can have a lot of your own creative ideas, but if you can bring on team members who add to your gifts and also bring their own unique gifts and you can
Mhm.
grow together through creativity, that is very powerful. It reminds me of when I used to sing in a choir. Like, to be
Yes.
honest, I loved more the resonant sound of the whole
Mhm.
than ever getting the solo.
Yes. Yes, similar. I sang a cappella in college in an all women's a cappella group, and there is nothing better than blending voices and feeling that
Oh my
resonance with
god,
other
those
it's like the
vibrations.
best
I
thing
do
in
it
the
with my
world.
kids. This is really funny.
Yeah.
With all of my kids, I have 4. When they're little, they like to make sounds, and then you can, like, resonate with their sound, and they
Uh-huh.
can feel that vibration. They will do
Yeah.
that for, 20, 30 minutes straight. I love doing that before bedtime. It's actually meditative.
For sure. For sure, because like, it's vibrating in your bones, like, when you make sounds with your vocal cords, like, it vibrates your whole body. I think it's so calming and healing.
I
Yeah.
tell my kids to pick, like, a vowel sound,
Yeah.
and then I make the same sound
Yeah.
with them, and they love it, and then they pick another sound. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I love that. I love that. Well, this is so awesome, Rena. We're kind of getting toward the end of our time, and I usually like to end my episodes with a creativity pro tip. So I thought, we could kind of brainstorm that together. So, like, what is something practical that people could take away from the conversation and kind of try out on their own? Like, maybe it's as simple as you were just saying, like, resonating with your vocal cords and like finding someone else, a family member, a friend, and just experimenting with sound. But I don't know, like, what's one practical tip that you would give people who are wanting to exercise their creativity more?
Yeah, when you just first asked me that, my first response, which I like to go with in being creative,
Yeah.
is if there's somebody that's doing something that you love, see if there's a way that you can fit into that.
Yeah.
That is my best tip. Like, there was a girl who reached out to me. Her name is Ray. She's called the Interdisciplinarian on Instagram. She has a podcast called Homeroom. And she said, I'm new to interviewing people, but the mission behind my podcast is that I was raised by a single mom and I want to do an even better job for my own daughter. She
Mhm.
was like, I would love to guest host your podcast. I thought that that was so sweet, so thoughtful, and a really good way to exercise her chops of wanting to do that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so if you see someone doing something interesting that you wanna be a part of, ask how you can get involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I think collaboration is such a good way to try something new. Recently, I thought of like wanting to launch another podcast.
Yes.
And so I reached out to somebody who had 21 podcasts, and he's an expert on a lot of the questions that I wanted to cover. And I said,
Mhm.
hey, would you be interested in maybe doing one segment a week or one segment a month? And so now we're brainstorming. And I sent him, oh my God, talking about creative process, I literally sent this guy like probably 100 topics that we could cover together.
Yeah,
Once he was like into the idea, I
that's
was like,
great.
well, here's some more ideas I have. Let me know which ones you
Yeah.
like.
I love that. Well, can't wait to see what comes out of that collaboration. Love that. So, well, thank you so much, Reena. It's been such a pleasure. I know we've been talking about doing this for a while now, so glad that today's today. Thank you for being with us, and I think we're going to do this as a co-release. So we'll see the conversation in your feed as well eventually.
I was gonna say, I can't
Yeah.
wait to hear what my dad is gonna say. And
I
like, thank you
know, I
so
know, me
much for
too,
like
me
sharing some of your
too.
daddy stories with me.
Yeah, for sure, I can't wait. I'd love to meet your dad someday. That would
Yeah.
be so fun. Okay, great. So find and connect with us at syncreate.org. We're on all the major podcast platforms under Syncreate and on social media. We're also on Patreon. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, leave us a review. And we're recording today at Record ATX Studios in Austin, Texas, with Reena in Houston. Thanks again so much for being with us. And the podcast is produced in collaboration with Mike Osborne at 14th Street Studios. Thanks so much for being with us, and see you next time.